to the second episode in our supply and demand series. In the first episode we looked at demand, and we're looking at the demand curve, so I recognise it would look something like that. This time we're going to be looking at the supply curve, okay? So last time we were looking at things from a consumer's point of view. This time we're looking at things from a supplier's point of view, from a producer's point of view, okay? So straight away you'll notice that the supply curve slopes the opposite direction to the demand curve. So the demand curve slopes downwards from left to right, and the supply curve, it slopes upwards from left to right, okay? So as we move from left to right, the curve slopes upwards. And as we said, we're looking at things from a supplier's point of view. And last time we said the demand curve with its downward slope had a negative relationship between price and quantity. So I'm sure we can all guess that the supply curve has a positive relationship. It has a positive relationship between price and quantity, okay? So as the price goes up, as we move away from our origin on the price axis or the y-axis, we also move away from our origin on the x-axis or the quantity supplied axis. Okay, and we can draw that here. So if we start off here, P1, and we just do the same thing we did with our demand curve, where we come across, we hit the supply curve, and then we come down, and you'll see that this is our quantity supplied. So Q1. If the price were to increase, okay, the price were to increase to P2, we do the same thing where we come across, we hit the supply curve, and from here we come down. We hit our Q, or our x-axis, our quantity axis, and we get Q2, okay? So you can see that they both move in the same direction, and that means there's a positive relationship. It doesn't mean that they both have to go up, the price and the quantity, but it just means they move in the same direction, okay? So as the price goes up, the quantity also goes up. If the price were to go from P2 to P1, so were to go the opposite direction, then the quantity would fall from Q2 to Q1. Okay. So you might be wondering why the supply curve slopes upwards. So last time we said that the demand curve sloped downwards because there's an inverse relationship. If we're looking at things from a consumer's point of view, if the price goes up, it's pretty natural that you'd assume that they're going to demand less. Okay, so if a can of soda were to go from €1 to 1.50, we'd assume that consumers are going to buy less cans of soda. Okay. This time, as we said, we're looking at things from a producer's point of view. And remember that revenue equals price by quantity, okay? So you might think, if the price were here at P1, why don't they just supply this much and they'd get a bigger revenue? Well, there's two reasons for that. One of them we're going to look at next time when we're looking at our equilibrium. And we'll see that suppliers don't supply more than they think they can sell. Wouldn't make sense, cost a lot of money to supply lots of goods, and if no one's demanding them, well then they're just going to be sitting in warehouses and it'll cost money to store them, etc. Another reason it slopes upwards is because of marginal cost. Okay, so you can see I've written marginal over here, and marginal, you're going to see it over and over and over again in economics. Marginal just means one additional unit of something, okay? So plus 1 unit of something. So marginal cost in this instance means the cost of producing 1 extra unit. We could have marginal revenue, which would be the revenue received from selling 1 additional unit. Or we might look at things later on like marginal utility. So the utility or satisfaction that a consumer gets from consuming an extra unit of a good. But for now we're looking at the marginal cost, okay? So marginal C. And it's the cost associated, or an increase in cost associated with producing an extra unit. And there's an increase in marginal cost, okay? So as we want to produce more and more, the cost for every additional unit increases. And we can look at that in more detail later on. We might do an episode on cost of production. But for now, you'll have to take my word on it. For every additional unit we want to produce, the marginal cost increases, okay? So if the price goes from P1, we've already gone through it, but we'll do another movement. So P1, and we're at Q1, and the market price the market price increases to P2, well then firms are going to supply more goods, okay? Firms are going to supply more units of the good. So we've covered movements. This is a movement where a change in quantity is caused by a change in price. We looked at that with demand. We looked at it with supply now. And now we're going to look at shifts, okay? So a shift in the supply curve. And it's the exact same as with demand, where a shift to the left means a decrease in supply, and a shift to the right means an increase in supply, okay? So if we were to shift to the left, this would be a shift to the left, and these should be parallel. I can do a little S here, and S1. These should be parallel to each other, but you can see that what I'll do is I'll draw in P1 here. Okay, so originally we would have supplied this much, but when the supply curve shifts to the left, we supply this much, so the supply has fallen. Okay, we're moving towards our origin. Okay, and similarly, a shift to the right just means an increase in supply. So why might a shift occur? So a shift is a change in supply for any reason other than a change in price. So we said that a movement is a change in the quantity supplied caused by a change in price. Price goes up, supply goes up, price goes down, supply goes down. Well, a shift is just a change in the quantity supplied for any other reason. And I've listed 5 here. There are others. But I'd say these are the 5 most common that could come up, especially if you're studying for an exam right now. I would have a look at your textbook if you are studying for an exam. Make sure there aren't any other important ones that I'm missing out that you need to know. But these 5 should cover the basics anyway. Okay, so a change in the number of suppliers. So let's just say this is the market for soft drinks. Okay. And an extra producer enters the market. So there were 7 producers, and now we add an extra 1. Well, have a quick think. That's supposed to be a 1. Have a quick think. Do we think that the supply curve is going to shift to the left or to the right? So an additional producer, our supply curve is going to shift to the right. Okay, so let's just say that the price was originally here, P1, and this was our original supply at this given market price, but an additional firm enters the market, and now this quantity is supplied. Okay. Have a quick look at question 2 there, or number 2. This will only generally shift the supply curve one direction, so left or right, okay? Remember, left is a decrease in supply, right is an increase in supply. Technology generally only shifts supply in one direction. I'm going to give you a few seconds, have a quick think. Do we think that technology will shift supply generally to the left or to the right? It generally only shifts supply to the right, okay? Why would a firm ever implement technology that decreases their supply? It doesn't really make sense. So technological innovations, they come along, they increase the amount firms can supply, they might reduce the cost of production, maybe they're more efficient, okay? But generally, technology is only implemented if it makes production more efficient or maybe less costly, okay? So generally, generally our supply curve, I'll redo that. Generally our supply curve only shifts to the right due to technology, okay? So let's say we're producing soda, and there's a new method of carbonation. We can now carbonate our soft drinks easier, okay? So P1, oh crap, it's a bit big. P1, and we come across, this was our original supply curve, and then a new technology was invented which made the production process more efficient, and we now produce quantity 2. Okay, so we went from Q1 to Q2. Okay, what about the cost of production? Again, have a quick think. Now this can shift either way. Cost of production could increase or decrease, but let's suppose the cost of production increased. Do we think that the supply curve is going to shift to the left or to the right? Okay, so the cost of production is increasing. Firms are going to supply, firms are going to supply less, okay? If the cost of production increases, firms supply less. Okay, so the supply curve shifts to the left, and we were producing at P1, the market price is P1. Originally we were producing this much, and the cost of production, so let's say again we're still producing soda or soft drinks or fizzy drinks, whatever you want to call them, and the cost of production increases. So let's say the price of aluminium, I think cans are made of aluminium, suppose that the price of aluminium increased, well then we're going to supply less. Okay, we're going to supply less. We're moving towards our origin. All right. Unforeseen circumstances, and I think this is quite topical at the moment. Unforeseen circumstances, COVID-19, coronavirus. Factories are shut down, they're not allowed to produce, and we'll draw a big shift. Okay, so the market price might initially stay the same. We were producing at P1, we were producing this quantity here, and then coronavirus hit. We could only have 5 people in the factory at once, and you can see that the quantity has dropped significantly. So there's another thing to note, I suppose. The bigger the shift, the bigger the decrease in quantity. The further apart these supply curves are, the greater the difference in quantity. Okay. Another thing that matters is the slope, and we'll get to that in another episode when we talk about elasticity. But I suppose in the meantime, have a quick think. Do we think that I suppose I can't get you to think about the question if we don't understand what elasticity is. But this would be more inelastic. This would be more elastic. Okay. I suppose in the meantime you can have a think about the consequences of a more elastic or inelastic supply curve, but for the time being we will move on to the price of other goods. The price of other goods. And this is similar goods. Okay, so let's suppose we are no longer producing soda or soft drinks or whatever you want to call it, and let's say we're producing runners or sneakers. So runners. I'm gonna stick to what I call them, but for anyone out here not from Ireland, runners are sneakers. Okay, so we produce runners, and let's say the price of shoes increases. So maybe smart dress shoes, the price of these shoes increases, and they increase significantly. Well, what we're going to do is, if we are savvy businessmen, is we will stop producing as many runners and we'll start producing shoes instead. So the supply of runners will decrease. Okay, so for the same price, P1, runners stayed the same price originally, but shoes increase in price, so we're going to stop producing runners and start producing shoes. And this could work the opposite as well. So let's say we were producing shoes and the price of, well, I suppose if the price of shoes increased, well then it would be a movement, wouldn't it? But I suppose we could do the opposite if the price of shoes fell in value, so the market price for shoes drastically decreased. Well then our supply curve will shift to the right, and we can't go much further. Okay. So one more thing to note is that we generally don't start our supply curve down here at the origin. generally we begin our supply curve a little bit up from the origin, so somewhere along the y-axis. And why is that the case? Well, there's fixed costs, isn't there? There's costs, maybe renting our factory, numerous other fixed costs. So we're not going to sell for less than it actually costs to produce. So until we reach this P1 here, which is where the supply curve starts, we're not going to produce anything. Once we reach that point, oh crap. Oops. Once we reach that point, well then we'll start to obey the law of supply, where as the price goes up to P2, we'll supply more, and as the price goes up even further, we'll supply more again. Okay, but generally the supply curve starts somewhere along the y-axis. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, if you found it helpful, please leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe, and stay tuned for our episode on the equilibrium, where we put our supply curve and the demand curve together and we find our equilibrium price and quantity. Okay, thanks very much.